Hey, ISO buddies, how we doing? Okay, somebody's going through a hailstorm. We've already got a couple of awesome viewers, Mantis God, Menagerie. Hopefully Victor's still around and Don. Haven't seen Vico Bubbles. If anybody knows, reach out and make sure they're okay. Haven't seen them in a couple of weeks. We have a good show for you today. I'm excited to learn more and find out more about this topic as I've gotten into it, as you'll see. Thanks to Rus, the great Rus Wilson of Aquarimax, now I can't think, the Bob Ross of isopods. We had his brother on, or his cousin on last week, who I'm convinced is the Bill Nye of bees. So I haven't told Joe that yet, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But thanks for coming on. Thanks for, as usual. We have our Patreon and all of that mess. Patreon, Redbubble. I'll put some links up later. I always forget to do that. But anyway, here's Rus. Now that I'm done begging for money, here's Rus.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome, Rus. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Good to see you again. Back. 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, not bad. I'll be here longer this time, though.
Yes, a few moments. We got 10 minutes. You said 10 minutes?
Yeah, at least 10, maybe 12.
We're going to, oh, good. Oh, just for us. We are going to delve deep today, I think, in a shorter amount of time. So keep us posted if you have to go. I know you said there's some health issues in your house. People aren't feeling so good, but let me know when that happens. And then we're talking about weather, apparently. So apparently there's a blizzard in North Dakota right now, too, or North Carolina. So Kevin Zeh, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about vernal pools. For those of you that don't know, these are microorganisms that live in fresh water and usually temporary pools of water, right? Like in a desert or an area where they're going to dry up and have seasonal rains. You've got your Triops, are the biggest one that I can think of physically and well-known. Daphnia can be, well, they're more of a lake.
They can be vernal pool too, though.
Okay. You've got copepods are there, but they're also in your standard pools. You've got clam shrimp or seed shrimp. You're going to see those today. Fairy shrimp. You're going to see some video of those. I don't have any of those available, unfortunately. But the fairy shrimp, none of those, as far as I know, I don't have any. I don't have any proof that I have any in my tanks, but I have the videos from you.
From me, yeah.
So, and Rus has several videos, great videos of vernal pools over at Aquarimax Pets channel. So check that out if you're interested in that beyond this video, which you will be, I'm sure. So cheers.
Yeah, and there's also plenty of other vernal pool organisms that we probably won't talk about as much, but there are a lot of amphibians that, rely on vernal pools in their particular ecosystem for part of their reproductive cycle. A lot of those pools are temporary. And in my area, you get the spadefoot toads that can go from egg to toadlet in about 2 weeks. And they do it in vernal pools. And then back east, like Kevin Zeh, he's in the stream today. He was talking about this. He's in Michigan, and he's got vernal pools where they have wood frogs, and I think is it marbled salamanders that come into the vernal pools and depend on those in their ecosystem. So there's a lot of creatures. We won't even be able to cover all of them, but there's a lot of creatures that rely on vernal pools at least some point of their life cycle.
I immediately had to think of why animal would need a vernal pool in a temperate region, but I guess there'd be no predators really, right? Or they'd be
That's
mitigated.
One of the advantages, yeah, is that the range of predators can be reduced, and many times there's an explosion at that time of food resources, and so you have relatively few species exploiting those sources, and like you said, predators. Amphibians often have fish that predate on them, but in a vernal pool, that's a little less common. Not that there aren't vernal pools with fish in them, because we have killifish, for example, that go into diapause in their eggs. And so vernal pools in Africa and other places do have killifish as well. I know that there are killifish, not just there are annual killifish in places other than Africa. Those are just some that I'm thinking of. But yeah, so there are fish, lungfish, that live in vernal pools too. That they go into an estivation state. So there's all kinds of creatures that live in
lungfish are so cool. That's like a dinosaur. That whenever I see those, I go, okay, dinosaurs ate those for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
That's so cool to see the biodiversity in a temporary environment or biome. Like it's so transitory
Yeah.
that it blows my mind. Now, my tank, obviously, your tanks are permanent. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. We're kind of talking about the microfauna that you're going to find in a vernal pool.
Mhm.
I also have worms. This is mine. Pardon the blur, but you can't really zoom on these here, guys. I'm
Oh, I
sorry.
love that the snail showed up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one of the ram's horns, right?
Let's get them in there. Yep, there's 2 blue ram's horns in here. And it won't. Did it pull it over to the big screen yet? No. Okay.
There we
My
go.
computer's being super slow because I have Facebook up too. So you guys can see copepods right in the center there. That's a female with egg sacs. That's not a male with testes. But every little dot on there is copepods basically right now. That big green mass in the background, that blurry green mass, I'm going to point at it, is there's a bag. Russ, you said not to really use a filter, just use a bubbler, but I couldn't get my head around that. So I had to insert the bubbler it's a mesh bag made for holding activated charcoal, activated carbon. So I have the bubbler in there, so it creates a current through the activated carbon, and it acts as a kind of like what I was thinking, an under gravel filter above gravel. So,
Yeah.
Because all that's in here I have is just riverstone, like bigger riverstone, about the size of a quarter.
Yeah.
Hi to everyone that showed up that I didn't see. So Rick and Wally, I think that's all I'm missing right now. But yeah, look at this guy go.
I'm loving this snail. Yeah.
Yes, there's definitely algae there. I feed the snails as well. There's 2 ram's horns, like I said. I'm hoping that they're breeding because I want to put them throughout other tanks.
Yeah, if you've got 2 ram's horns in there, it's inevitable. You're gonna get babies for sure.
There's 4 mixed color ones in the newt tank that have been going, but these 2 got pulled out of there, and they're doing really well. Oh, look at that little loop-de-loop. So these copepods, this is on my work desk, and I watch this all day. I was telling Russ before we started, if a customer that I'm talking to is, some of my customers are very annoying and repeat the same thing and don't listen, and so you just kind of tune them out and watch a vernal pool.
Yeah.
So I watch copepods and seed shrimp. But that green mass is kind of where the seed shrimp congregate. I posted a little video on Facebook today that you'll see like 50 of them on that little bag. So I was surprised to see them. They just appeared one day, and they're all about the same size. So they're going to overrun that tank. I'm hoping that they'll be big enough for the newts to eat. So I can kind of supplement. I think that'll be a great little snack for the newts.
Yeah. A lot of people use them to feed their fish and whatnot too. So it seems like that would make sense for the right size of newt.
Yeah. Now, is that kind of how you started in vernal pools? I mean, after being a kid, probably you had a tank as a kid.
I played with. Let's see. We're going back many years in history now to think about how this all worked. I was keeping some vernal pool organisms, like facultative vernal pool organisms like daphnia, which can live in permanent bodies of water or vernal pools. You know, a lot of the species can do both. Some are better in one and better in the other. Anyway, I was doing that. I was no older than 13 when I started doing that.
Okay.
And then I started branching out more when I was an adult. I got into triops when, about 20 years ago when my kids were babies, and figured out a way to raise triops and have them, increase the survivability of triops. A lot of people they'll have trouble getting triops to survive in the that stage right after they hatch, and about the first 3 days is kind of the critical period. And I figured out some ways to get them going. And then I kind of took a break from vernal pool organisms because I moved to Hawaii and you can't keep a whole lot there. And so I just had some moina, which it could be counted as vernal pool organisms. That's about it. And then I came back and I discovered ArizonaFairyShrimp.com and started getting into all the stuff, that they have, and tried out this seed shrimp and different types of fairy shrimp and whatnot. And I've raised many of them multiple times, including triops generation after generation from the same stock, and seed shrimp and clam shrimp and whatever, all different types of stuff.
Wow. Now, most of these guys, the daphnia and the copepods my copepods are obviously reproducing like crazy in this tank.
Yes.
And they just showed up. I don't know where they came from.
Well, you got your stock from me, right?
Yeah, but the copepods were here before I got your daphnia.
Oh, before my stuff.
Yeah, this tank was set up for a couple weeks, and the copepods were there already. So
okay. I know that I have copepods in my tank, but if these were there before you, then obviously they came from somewhere else. they could have come from any number of sources, whatever you seeded the tank with. I mean, they could have come in on the snails, to be honest.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
There's a lot of possible sources for the copepods. They're often in low numbers in aquariums, and people don't notice because the fish are picking enough of them off. But you get one or two in there, and boom, you're good.
That's what I think is great. They definitely seeded my my tank with my newts too, so I think that when the babies hatch out, they have a little bit of a buffer before I find them to try to eat some in there.
Right.
They have a food source already there, but I think it's not as concentrated, so it's hard to ensure that they're going to be okay. But this is the primary source of food. This and Nauplii from brine shrimp is their primary food source right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, these tanks, I think they're fascinating. I'd like to keep this tank. I debated putting a baby newt in here, just one, to let it grow out, but I don't want it to just devastate this population because they're pigs. Amphibians, we all know they're pigs.
Yeah.
So
they could totally do that.
Yeah, my thought would be that it would get too big too fast to really do damage. Like it would ignore these microorganisms at some point. But I didn't want to risk it. I think I have such a cool population in here that it's a lot of fun to watch, and I can always harvest as needed.
Yeah, yeah, and then you have that diversity is not going to be affected by the newt that comes in there.
Right.
Newtzilla, yeah, like
Newtzilla. There's already a few that have legs, like they're 2 little legs. So I'm excited to see them kind of transmogrify, right?
Yeah.
Now, so the copepods and the daphnia are permanent residents. Like they will breed, they'll have babies in this tank, no problem. They go from egg to baby, no worries. Now, the fairy shrimp, certain species, I know for sure, and the seed shrimp, the eggs will have to be harvested and dried out. Is that right?
Seed shrimp depends on the species you're working with, but a lot of the species will just keep going indefinitely, like daphnia or the copepods. Fairy shrimp, yeah, it depends on species. Some will reproduce multiple generations. Like some people aren't aware that brine shrimp, like the type we use, the Great Salt Lake and the San Francisco Bay varieties and others, are able to go indefinitely, reproducing without producing the resting eggs. They give live birth when they're in conditions that are optimal. And then when conditions are less than optimal, they produce the resting eggs or the cysts that we buy and we hatch. So that's some of the others. There's the daphnia zipping by. Some of the other vernal pool organisms will do the same thing.
Okay. Kevin has some good comments here about absence of these species and other species along with other physical characters help determine whether the wetland we're looking at is a vernal pool or some other type of wetland.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great comment because you can often look and determine, but by looking at, you can say, oh, there are these species of fairy shrimp here, and these are only going to occur in a temporary body of water where they have a resting phase and so on. And you can determine that pretty quickly where you might not otherwise be able to do so. So great point, Kevin.
Oh. How did I get Russ knocked out of here? Let me see. Okay.
Oh.
Let's try and get Russ back in here. There we go. This is a video of daphnia that Russ sent me. So these are daphnia in a massive cloud. Now they're attracted to light. It looks like as much as the brine shrimp. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Generally, when daphnia are doing well, they're very phototactic. So they will hang out right under a light, like these guys or these gals are doing. They're mostly female in this situation because the females tend to be parthenogenic under good conditions, rather like the brine shrimp. And then when conditions get bad, they produce the resting eggs. So most of these in this situation are probably female.
Okay, so they require males to produce the cysts?
Yes.
Okay. See, look at, life is so crazy. Biology is the most insane study, I think. I find out the most ridiculous things when I'm talking to my guests. That just blew my mind. That just blew, like, oh, the males just sit around until times are hard. Which, sure. That's what I do at home. Like when there's a need, I fill it. But until it's a need, I say, it'll be fine. It's a lawn. How long can it get? Oh, 2 feet. Okay. All right. I just think they're fascinating. And now this is a food source for all of your fish tanks.
Yep. And I've used them for raising other critters as well as fish. And I end up selling a lot of them because people want a starter culture, and I'll mail them a starter culture. These guys or gals, I guess, and they can get a colony going like this within weeks if they got everything set up right.
Yeah, you can see. So the daphnia that Russ sent me, Russ was kind enough to send me a little baggie of. There were two baggies. One was this little baggie of a little ball of algae, macroalgae for a brine shrimp, or not a brine shrimp, but a brine tank that's going to have the opeula, and 2 or 3
I think it was
really tiny ram's horn, or not ram's horn, but the
Malaysian trumpet snails.
Trumpet snails, yeah, Malaysian trumpet snails. So, and they're doing great, by the way. I don't have the opeula yet because I don't have what I think is a significant amount of algae at all.
Smart to wait.
I'm gonna wait, let it season more.
Yep. Way to do it.
I think it's okay, but we're gonna try. So, and then in the other baggie was daphnia, some scuds, which show up from time to time in my tank. They're very shy, but they're getting more bold.
Yeah, as they breed, they'll get bolder and bolder, just like isopods. They'll be just like your orange koi eventually.
Oh God. Okay. Well, they'll get fed off too. I think that at a full size, the newts are like my other fish. I have a fish tank of small fish. They'll enjoy them as well.
Oh yeah, because the scuds can get half an inch long if you let them go there full size.
Oh wow. Okay, then definitely. And I'll seed the tank, my 10-gallon tank, with that as well, so that they can, have a grazing. The fish can just have a grazing natural food source. But yeah, scuds is another one. Scuds is another organism that's in my tank. But anyway, there was maybe, I didn't count them obviously, but there were like probably 40 or so daphnia in that little baggie, and maybe half a dozen to a dozen of the scuds, and probably some seed shrimp as well. But now the tank is just not overrun, but there are so many in there that it's amazing to me. I was just blown away. So, and to see this, like you said, in a couple of weeks, you can get this starting with, what's your starter culture? What do you usually?
It's usually around the size of the ones I sent you, and it just depends on how much I have. Because if it's going to work, you don't need any more. And if it's not going to work, it means your conditions are bad and it wasn't going to work anyway. So I generally, the numbers are small enough that around 50 or so, and sometimes a little more. It kind of depends on the luck of the draw. But in a few weeks, if everything's good, they're just going to go nuts.
They are going nuts. So, and these guys are filter feeders. So Russ has a video that he has a recipe for food with different kinds of flowers. I could only really find 2 of the flowers that you had without looking online. And so that mine are on pea flower and chickpea flower right now. And they're exploding. So, and then I found some spirulina. I took some spirulina wafers and just crushed them into powder and mixed that in there as well. So, that's my mix for mine. And they get a blast of that every day, which will probably calm down a little bit once the numbers get up there.
Yeah.
But most of these organisms are filter feeders, right?
Yep. Some of them are filter feeders exclusively. Some of them are facultative filter feeders. And then some of them are more about heavier particles that they're not pulling out of the water. It just depends on the species. So daphnia are primarily filter feeders, but they will go down to the bottom when they're hungry and they can't find anything in the water column and bump the detritus, kick it up, and try to pull stuff out of it. So if you put, say, an algae wafer in there, a piece of algae wafer in there, and there's nothing in the water for them to pull out, they'll go down and bump it. And I
definitely do that. I definitely do that for the snails and the scuds, to throw in like a quarter of one or something, a little tiny piece. Yeah. Because it's just the 2 snails and they have other things to eat. But yeah, they definitely are down for that. And I'm kind of dreading the water change, because how do you get a water change without sucking out half of your population?
Okay. Well, I'll give you 2 tips that I would say. One is, one of the major foods that I feed now is just dropping an algae pellet in there. Once your scuds population is high enough, you just drop the algae pellet in there. The scuds will just rip it apart, and as they do, they particulize it, and enough of it goes up into the water column that the daphnia get a great meal too. And so you can basically feed that entire thing on algae chips once it's mature. I wouldn't do it now, beyond what you're doing, but the primary food source for your tank could just be algae chips once the scuds are to a point where they can do that.
Okay. All right.
The other thing that I would say is that when you do the water changes, inevitably you're going to lose some, like you mentioned. One thing you can do is pour the water you remove through like a fine mesh net. and then you can get almost everything back in if you want to do that. Another thing you can do is just use that, put that water into a tank where you got stuff that's going to eat it. Sometimes I'll just dump all that water into a tank of fish, and then we'll just go to crazy.
That makes sense.
Eating it. And then I'm giving my fish a live food snack. I'm not wasting anything. And then, it's a good way to recycle. And if you don't want to put the water in there because you're concerned about the water quality from this going into your fish tank, you can just, dump it through a fine mesh net and then put it in.
I'm not concerned about the water quality. I think that the tank, I don't know if this is a thing or not, but I do the smell test. I feel like any tank of mine that has been like, oh, this needs a water change, it has a smell. It has an aroma of like fouled water. Not awful like toilet water or something like used toilet water, but there's a definite aroma to it that's not just clear water.
There can be.
Yeah, and this tank right now, the water is cloudy, just not now, but when I feed, the water's cloudy when I feed, but then it's just crystal clear like an hour and a half later. So they're getting most of it, or it's settling right now.
Yeah, that's good. And that means they're eating the food pretty fast. And this is the point where you want to be careful not to feed too little and not to feed too much. It's a delicate balance because if you're not giving them enough, they're not going to be proliferating. Of course, it sounds like they are, so I think you're doing fine. But this is the point when people get stuck because they're either feeding too little and starving everybody out without noticing that's what they're doing, or too much and killing everybody off because the water quality goes to pot. So, but it sounds like you're in the sweet spot right now.
I'm hoping there's enough plant matter there now. I think that the algae is acting as kind of a filter, and like I said, the little filter setup that I have gives me a little buffer. So this weekend will be the first water change. So that's some good advice.
Cool. And water changes.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say water changes generally energize your daphnia population, and it doesn't even have to be a big water change. I usually do like a 20% water change on or even a 10% water change on my daphnia tank at once. And usually right after, within a few days, boom, the population just explodes.
Wow, that's good to know.
That's good to know. Basically, it's a signal when the water changes. You change the water. It's kind of like, oh, it just rained, and now it's time to breed.
Okay, all right. That's a good little, almost like a rain chamber for your frogs or something.
Yeah, it's the same principle basically.
They're reacting to their environment. That's good.
Yeah.
Now, you were saying before we started that we were going to talk about a little bit about harvesting the eggs, and we a little bit touched on that we would need to do that eventually, but you have a trick, you said, or you have some methods that you use to harvest eggs.
Yeah. Maybe this would be a good time. It's up to you totally. It's your show. But if we were to show the Triops, because this applies specifically to Triops and also to other species. But
let me get to them. I'll pull that out real quick, and then
I love that it just.
Let's see. This is the fairy shrimp. Okay. Here's the Triops. Okay. All right. Now I'm finally getting good with this. I hope Wally's impressed. All right. Here's the Triops. This is kind of my next step, so I'll be bugging you for information about Triops as well. But
okay. Yeah, and I totally want to give you all some tips on Triops. They are so fantastic because they're big. They're photogenic, if you like that kind of thing. And I do. Look at that face. Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. It's like a tiny horseshoe crab.
Yeah, and it's not actually that tiny. I mean, it's huge compared to most vernal pool crustaceans that we're dealing with. There's actually some fairy shrimp that rival it in size. Like there's Brachinecta gigas that gets about 2.5 inches long. It's crazy. Fairy shrimp. Beaver tail fairy shrimp get pretty big too. Not that big, but they get like 2 inches long, and they're not quite as massive. They're long and thin compared to a Brachinecta gigas. But anyway, they're one of the bigger ones. There are some Triops that are dwarf this particular species. This is Triops longicaudatus, the most common species you'll find in the hobby and in the U.S., just around, native to my state and many other states. But there are some really huge ones. There's a gigantic one from Africa that, would drape itself across the palm of my hand into my fingers.
Wow.
Big thing. And Triops cancroformis from Europe that gets at least 2 or 3 times as big as one of these guys. So
now that is a shed skin he keeps running into, right?
Yep.
That's a molt.
That's shed skin. Okay. That's a molt. And so I want to give y'all some tips on Triops, okay? A couple of pro tips that I discovered. One I discovered about 20-something years ago when I had my first successful batch of Triops. Okay. The thing is, when a Triops hatches, it looks just like a brine shrimp nauplius, like, which is the singular of naupli that nobody ever uses. But anyway, it looks about the same. But the thing is, triops grow a lot faster, and they need to eat a lot more. So you have a short period during which the triops is just feeding off its yolk sac and not eating anything. But within a very short time, within 24 hours or so, depending on the temperature of the water and so on, it's going to look a lot like a triops, except for much smaller, and going to be eating the same way a triops does. And if it does not get enough to eat, first of all, it's going to go after its siblings, or the other triops and other vernal pool life that hatches. And if it can't get enough from doing that, as well as filter feeding and doing all the other things whatever it's doing to try to find food, it's just going to die. And a lot of people lose their triops because they starve to death in that those first couple of days when they're too small to eat like big solid food, really, and they're too big to survive on just the infusoria that they pull out of the water from at the beginning. So one thing to do, I've found a great tip, is to use microworms as a food.
Okay.
Because microworms are like exactly the right size. They wiggle around and attract the triops' attention, presumably, and it works great. So I was able to raise triops in huge densities the first time that I raised triops. Huge densities, like unheard of densities, because they weren't eating each other because they had plenty of food. So they weren't killing each other off. Generally, what people do is when they're raising triops, they'll get one or two that get to adulthood because they're eating each other. They just run out of food. And that's one way to help in those first couple of days, using those microworms, because the microworms will stay in the water column and stay alive for 24, 48 hours, no problem. And you don't have to overdo it to get them enough of them, a high enough density in the tank for the triops to be able to find them. So that can help a lot.
Now I need to culture another darn thing.
Yeah, fortunately, they're super easy to culture, though. And then another thing to think about is, and I don't know if you want me to jump this far, but as far as saving eggs, do you want me to jump into saving eggs?
Yeah, we're there. I mean, we're on the topic, so that's fine.
Okay, cool. So saving the eggs is something that people often wonder about. They'll get a set of triops, and they're able to hatch them and grow at least one or two to adulthood. And then they say, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mimic the vernal pool experience. I'm going to let all this water dry, slowly dry off. I'm going to put it out on my porch or whatever, let it sit there for a few weeks in the sun and dry out completely. And then I'm going to dump in water, and it's going to hatch, and it'll be great. And I'll have all these triops again. And what usually happens is they dump in water, and maybe they'll get a hatch and they'll see some baby triops in there. And then a day or two later, everything's dead. And I want to talk about, or they dump a bunch of water in there and nothing happens. It just turns into a smelly mess, and they never see any triops at all or any naupli of anything. And there's two things I want to point out there. One is, what kind of water are you putting in there? Okay. First of all, a lot of people don't realize that you want to put water with very low total dissolved solids in there. So RO water, distilled water, something like that, because they are used to it being rainwater. And what you do when you let the water dry up, you're letting all the minerals that were in there settle and concentrate. And so if you don't put something like distilled water or water with very low mineral content, they're not going to have the signal they need to survive based on osmotic pressure and so on. They're not going to hatch, typically. Okay. If it's low enough, and it depends on species and various things, but like my water's liquid rock coming out of my tap. And, so I can dechlorinate it, but it's not gonna do the job in general. I mean, a few eggs will sometimes hatch with that, but it's really the proportions are really poor. You're going to get a very poor hatch rate if you use water with a lot of total dissolved solids in it. If you live in Seattle, maybe, and the water coming out of the tap is basically rainwater, then you might be fine. So it depends on what you're using, but usually RO or distilled water are the best. But another thing is, when you pour all of that, when you pour even the correct water on all of that substrate, there is too much in that substrate in terms of organic material, in proportion to the number of eggs and so on, that what you're going to get is a huge bacterial bloom, and they're going to suck up all the oxygen and typically kill off whatever's in there. So you may have a decent hatch of triops eggs, but they're all going to die because there's just too much bacteria in the water and there's not enough oxygen for them to survive. So the best thing to do if you want to hatch to hatch eggs. And this goes for triops. It also goes for fairy shrimp and whatever, anything that has resting eggs. The best thing to do is when everything kind of dies off, assuming, or if you're having a more permanent run tank, like in your tank, it would be a little different. But if you're having one that's, say, just triops and fairy shrimp, and when everything kind of dies off, the adult, that generation dies off, you want to pour off 95% of the water. Then you can pull out a tablespoon at a time or so. It doesn't, it's not a magic quantity. It's just approximately a tablespoon or so of the substrate out, and dry that. Like put it on a piece of parchment paper or something out in the sun, whatever. Let it dry completely. Then when it's completely dry, you can store it for a while. And then add 1 tablespoon at a time to a fairly small container with that distilled water or the reverse osmosis water, something like that. And a little bit of organic material. Some people use like a small amount of dried leaf litter or a little bit of compost or something. Don't go crazy with it, because what you want is enough food in there for microorganisms to start proliferating fairly quickly. And if you put compost in there, then the microorganisms are already there and their food is already there. But you don't need a lot, just a little bit, just a little teeny bit of that, or the leaf litter, whatever it happens to be. Some people use cocoa fiber. You have options, but something small, put it in there, and it should be a fairly small container, because like you were talking about with your newts, it's all about food density. And hatching triops in a really large container is generally not a great idea. So once you get them past a few days, though, you can move them carefully into a new enclosure, a new aquarium with more water and so on. And then you'll tend to get a lot more success. And this is true of daphnia, that's true of fairy shrimp or anything. This balance of how much food, how much oxygen, and also think about the fact that in the wild, their cues for hatching include the rainwater, like I mentioned, temperature, and a lot of light. They're getting a lot of light. So to increase your hatch rate, you can often either put them in the sun or put a bright light over them, and that will help too. And it will, depending on the light, and a little warmth will help as well. The triops will hatch at cooler room temperatures, but if you just step up the temperature, if you go to say 80 degrees, they're going to hatch a lot faster and grow a lot faster than they would at 70, 72.
That makes sense, because they're out in a pool that basically is just bombarded by sunlight the whole time, and it's shallow, so it would be pretty warm.
Yeah. Typically.
So, Menagerie had a question that is kind of related. So, microworms. What specific species are you talking about? A specific species, and you said they're easy to culture. So, like, what's the process?
Okay, cool. Microworms, and you can also use Walter worms or banana worms or whatever. They basically culture the same way and whatever. Walter worms are Pangrellus redivivus, I think. And I don't know how to put that in the chat when I'm in StreamYard, but if anybody has that scientific name, Pangrellus redivivus, these worms are sold largely for just aquarium fish and so on. I've been culturing them for years. I started culturing them when I was about 13. So that's been a very long time. And they're super easy to culture. Usually use kind of a cereal-based, moist cereal-based mix. I use oatmeal as my base, and I'll put things in it, like put a little bit of active yeast, put some nutritional yeast in. I'll put spirulina in and things like that to kind of boost the nutritional profile of them. But basically, you put them in a container like that with low ventilation, but some ventilation up at the top. And then as they proliferate, oxygen becomes a limiting factor. They start climbing up the sides of the container. You use like a yogurt container, a deli cup or whatever. Then you just get a Q-tip and just scoop them off. It takes about a week-ish, depending on temperature, from the time you start the culture until you can harvest. And you just scoop them off. You're getting pure worms. You're not taking any of that oatmeal or anything out. Well, very little of it. You're just getting pure worms, essentially, on that Q-tip. And then you just sprinkle it in the water, and I give it to my fish. I give it to, like I said, the triops, whatever, and they will eat it. And you have to just restart your culture every week or two, because the old one starts to get really rank after a while, and you have to toss it. It smells absolutely terrible if you let it go too long, so you don't want to. And it works like a charm.
See, there you go, and it's renewable.
Yeah, forever.
Fantastic. See, that's cool. As long as you keep on top of it, that's good. And it doesn't sound like it's very high maintenance at all.
No, it's pretty easy.
So now with fairy shrimp, like you're saying with fairy shrimp at Triops, like collecting the eggs and letting them dry out like that is similar. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, it's basically the same procedure. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Because I definitely am going to have fairy shrimp, hopefully, in this tank. I didn't listen to the instructions. The instructions for the little eggs are what you're talking about. So you hatch them in pure distilled water in a smaller container.
Mm-hmm.
Let them hatch, let them grow a little bit, and then put them into your bigger container. I just dumped the egg. I was like, this tank's already good. Dump them in. So not my best move, but it worked. There goes a daphnia jerking around.
Yep.
They are. I don't know how they survive in such numbers in the wild because they are the derpiest. Like they don't seem to know where they're going when they juke whatever appendage they do to swim.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put swim in quotes because if you see them in a macro lens, like that is not swimming. That is just like they have no idea where they're going. I guess their predators don't either, but
yeah. The only reason they survive is because they reproduce exponentially. They survive by their sheer numbers.
That has to be it. And in my tank, like obviously there's no, or in a tank situation, there's obviously no predators there present, but it's so crazy to see them swim. Like they make me laugh every time. They're like little clowns. Like, woo! You see the copepods kind of have a purpose.
Yeah.
They go in a line or they jerk towards something. But then you'll see this like drunk daphnia swimming around and it's hilarious.
Yep.
I want to pull up those fairy shrimp just because. Because I don't want to waste any little bit of video that you sent me. Is this another one? Okay, this is one. All right. So now the fairy shrimp I was supposed to get and hatch were the ones, they look like they're about an inch long. They have some blue.
Are these the red tail fairy shrimp?
These are
red tails right here.
Okay.
This is Streptocephalus coelii, which means something like twisted head, seal's twisted head fairy shrimp.
Okay.
Because the males have these curvy, their antennae, but their antennae claspers, they're modified into claspers to inseminate the females with. You can see the one on the left, the right there is a male with the claspers.
Oh, there he is.
Curved up.
Yeah.
They're up on his head. And really, they're swimming upside down, so you have to keep that in mind. But fairy shrimp pretty much always swim upside down. And the males have the claspers, grab onto the female, and hang there to fertilize her eggs.
I feel like that's such a weird thing because it is that we classify it as upside down, but it's right side up to them, so it's bizarre.
Right.
Like a seahorse, the male has the eggs. Well, okay, man. Like, why not call that the female? Like, I get it.
Yeah, and it's weird because to them it's swimming the right way, and we just think of it as upside down because their legs, which are really they're called thoracopods in fairy shrimp rather than true legs, but that's what we would think of as the analog to legs. Are facing up. So but you're right.
I think it's fascinating. Like the way that they move is so once they get full size and you can actually see them is so like it's almost hypnotic.
It is. It's a little bit like millipede legs.
I was gonna say that. I was gonna say it's like millipede legs, that feathery kind of a motion, but not as smooth as millipedes. But this is it's pretty cool to see them. I want to get these guys full grown in my tank because they don't attack anything. They don't eat. I assume. I don't know that much about them. They're not eating like the copepods and stuff, are they?
These fairy shrimp are not. They're filter feeders. They're not predators. There are species like the big one I was talking to you about, the Brachinectogigas, are fairy shrimp predators. They eat other species of fairy shrimp. That's their thing. That's what they do. So there are some species that are predaceous, but not this one.
You're going to see me behind me is going to be just flasks and little hurricane jars of bubblers with random species in it because now I'm fascinated by that. I want to see that behavior.
Yeah.
I think the menagerie agrees. That's totally like millipede legs. That's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
now you sent me one more. That is
these are beaver tail
shrimp.
And beaver tails, their scientific name means bushy head with a flat tail.
Okay, all right.
Dominocephalus Platyuras.
Are these full grown?
No, these are tiny. This is like a day old right here.
Okay, this is your Nauplius.
And they're growing fast though as the video progresses. These I've never seen any fairy shrimp grow as fast as these guys. They are amazing. Every day there's a gigantic difference in their size, and these guys get about 2 inches long.
Wow.
They're a seriously big fairy shrimp, and their tails get bright orange as they're fully grown. I don't think I have any.
Look at that.
You can see the orange tail there for
Yeah.
a second. These aren't even fully grown in this video. They are easily over an inch long, but they're not even fully grown.
I feel like if you could get eggs for these on a regular basis, this would be a great food for a fish tank. Like if they grow that fast.
Oh yeah, yeah. When they're that big, I mean, you could feed a lot of big fish with them and so on. You'd have to be able to produce enough of them. But these Nopli are just a few hours old. I mean, they grow so fast. It's incredible how fast they go. I think this was just 24 hours old, and they've already definitely metamorphosed and gone through several stages. I don't think any of the shrimp in the end of this video are only a week old, and they're over an inch long. It's nuts.
There's some of that orange.
Yeah, and it gets even brighter as they get older. I wish I had finished that video.
Okay.
I had done the second part of this video. I never did it, but I had them in a 20-gallon tank out on my balcony. This shot was from my balcony too. I started them out in like a 3-gallon tank, and that's what is in this video. And then I moved them into a 20-gallon, and they just went like gangbusters, and they were huge and beautiful and everything. And I just never filmed it. Stuff was getting in the way, and I didn't film it. But they were gorgeous. And then I let them go for a while, and they were doing really well. And then eventually, some hair algae started growing in the tank, and the tank kind of went downhill from there. But they were pretty fantastic. And what I should have done instead of letting that hair algae take, is once I got them hatched outside and let them go for a couple of days, I should have just brought them in so I could control the light and so on. Yeah. And that's usually what I do. Is I do most of my vernal pool stuff indoors. But this was an experiment just to see how it went outside, and it went well until it didn't. And there you go.
Until it didn't. We're always experimenting. I think it's great to keep that going and not just go with established methods, even if, like you yourself, have made established methods for your stuff.
Right, but it's fun to switch it up and see what you find out. And I found out stuff.
Yeah, it might have been a good thing. It might have been.
Yeah, and one thing that's fabulous about these beaver tail shrimp is they are extremely aware of you. They see you coming, and they will dart off. I encountered them in the wild. I was up in a meadow in California with my sister-in-law, who was working for the Fish and Wildlife Service at the time, and we were helping her doing a survey on some amphibian species in the area. So we were visiting a vernal pool as part of that, and it was the first time I'd ever seen beaver tail fairy shrimp at all, and they were gigantic. And I thought, holy cow, that's a fairy shrimp, and it's like 2 inches long. What's going on? And as I approached them, they knew I was coming, and they immediately darted off. And most fairy shrimp are a little bit like derpy daphnia. You're like, whatever, I'm just swimming around here. I don't care what's going on. But the beaver tail fairy shrimp are totally different. They're extremely aware of what you're doing.
That's a cool to see that they have that kind of survival instinct that other, I don't feel like most of these vernal pool organisms have that. The copepods definitely do. I try to catch them with a little eyedropper. Nope, not happening. I could catch the daphnia all day like that to get 1 or 2 at a time, and the copepods are not. They see it coming and they're gone.
Yeah.
So, which for something so minute is like, okay, that makes sense. But to see the 2-inch, I would love to see a swarm of them just zoop, and 2 inches long is crazy.
Yeah, they are fantastic animals. I'm thinking of hatching some again this summer. It's mostly the things that I've had for a number of years now, since the last time I made these videos, has been, I've had daphnia and copepods and sea shrimp and so on constantly, basically for years and years and years. But I haven't done any triops or fairy shrimp for a while. And even though I've done both of them many times, it's just been a while since I've done it. So I need to do it again.
Yeah, thinking of the triops myself, like really seriously thinking about it, because I've always wanted to do it since as soon as I saw them in kits as a kid. You'd see them at like Toys R Us and be like, oh, okay. Yeah.
And the kits, the instructions in the kits are usually absolute, shall I say, garbage.
Yes, you can say garbage, trash.
Yeah, they really are not very effective in doing it. Usually the foods they include in the kit, if they include a food, not excellent food for little baby triops. So that's why I had to, experiment until I hit upon the methods I was talking to you about. I want to share them with everybody so you can all grow your own, and you can all not only grow your own, but you can keep generations after generation. Because like I was saying, the method that I used that I explained to you a little while ago for the eggs.
Yeah.
I used it for years and just, I'm just going to go pick up some of that sand, throw a tablespoonful of sand in there with a little bit of organic material in my distilled water. Boom! I have more triops.
Fantastic, with a little spoon of compost to go with it.
Yep, compost or leaf litter, cocoa fiber, something that has enough organic material in there to get that initial microorganismal bloom that feeds them for the first few hours of their lives.
Wow. Is that something you could set up ahead of time, like set the tank up the day or two ahead of time before you dump the sand in? Or do you kind of go together?
They kind of go together. You
Okay.
don't, I mean, you can put the water in beforehand if you want, but you don't want to let the microorganisms bloom for too long, because if you do, you'll get that same oxygen issue where
Right.
they've been going
Okay.
so long that now there's no more oxygen in there, or there's, you'll get hair algae going in there, and you don't necessarily want to do that. This kind of thing. So it's basically do it at the beginning. You have to be careful also that some of the eggs will often get lodged in the meniscus up against the edge of the tank.
Okay.
And you want to keep an eye on that, especially in the first few hours while they're hydrating, that they're not stuck up there. So you can maybe pour in the water, let it sit for an hour or so, and then after probably longer than an hour, maybe 3 or 4 hours, go back in and pour in so there's like a 1/4 inch more. And so it gets those eggs that were kind of stuck on the meniscus back down into the water.
They won't float up with the new water? They won't just rise up with that?
They might, but at least it gives them a chance to get dislodged from that and hopefully kind of get somewhere else where they're going to hydrate better.
That makes sense. I know I'm so ridiculous. I would be there with a little eyedropper, like just dropping it over them to see.
Oh, I've done that.
Like fall in, like and take 2 hours instead of just dumping a 1/4 cup or a cup of water in there.
Yeah.
Which makes so much more sense. That's such a great cheat mode. And you're getting called Obi Russ Kenobi, which I think is fantastic.
Oh, I like it. I actually do. I have a costume, Halloween costume. I got the whole bit.
Which I've seen on your Facebook. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Are you excited for the show that's coming?
Oh, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show? Yeah. I want to see that. I'm pretty jazzed about that. Yeah.
Fantastic. I am too. Like, he's my favorite character in the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah, he's one of mine too, for sure.
I'm completely stoked. And Ewan McGregor did such a great job.
Yeah. Despite the writing and other issues, he himself was magical. So
I want to say I feel bad for actors in movies that get panned so badly, and like the one, what did we just see, Morbius, and Jared Leto was so good and the movie was so awful. like he did everything he could to make it work, and God bless him, he got dealt a really bad hand.
Yeah,
but
unfortunately,
so sad. But back to these guys, I just love this whole. It's a tiny ecosystem. And it's so tiny, I would love to introduce a tiny predator as well, but I don't want to risk that. Like, I don't want to risk that because they would just overwhelm everything. There'd be no predator for the predator to keep it in check,
Right. Oh, I have a tip for you related to that. You've given me lots of good tips. Is this cool if I just say it?
Yeah.
Okay. I have had more than one person contact me and ask me, what kind of water should I use to change my tanks with and this kind of stuff. So a couple of things is that a lot of times the reason why people fail with this is the needs of a newly hatched vernal pool organism are often different from the needs of an adult one. When a vernal pool in the wild, when it gets rained on, and it gets filled up that way, the water is going to have very low total dissolved solids initially.
Yeah.
But as it sits there over time, both the water is going to evaporate, which is going to increase the total dissolved solids. Dust and junk like that's going to be blown in there, and just things are going to leach out from the sand or the rocks or whatever in many cases. So you're going to get some carbonates in the water, and the hardness is going to increase. That is good because these are crustaceans. They need a little bit of those minerals to be able to create their exoskeleton. So that's not a bad thing. But the needs of the young ones very different from the needs of the old ones. So you have to keep that in mind. And also, you need to make transitions gradual, because if you take water that is very low in total dissolved solids, especially carbonates, and then you pour in water that has some carbonates in it immediately, what you're going to get is a really nasty chemical reaction where ammonium, which is not terribly dangerous to vernal pool organisms, becomes ammonia, which is more dangerous to several vernal pool organisms, and you can burn them. And the pH change.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That ammonia can become extremely toxic and kill them off. So when you are doing that change from this really low total dissolved solids water to one that has higher total dissolved solids, you want to like use a drip acclimation process. Do it slowly to acclimate them. So that's the thing to think about. And then there was another one I was going to tell you about too. Oh, some people say, well, I'm not going to use dechlorinated tap water. I'm going to use water from my aquarium. And I say, well, that's great as long as you know there are no hydra in there.
Yes, that was your biggest concern, because I was talking about putting some live plants. So I put a little bit of Java moss in here, and I haven't seen. I've been keeping a super eye on it. I haven't seen an inkling. Inkling of hydra. So in any of the tanks that it's in. So fingers crossed that we don't have any. But so far, I've been all over this tank with a macro lens, just watching the animals, and I've never seen anything remotely like a hydra in it. So
that's good. And let's hope it stays that way, because I've had people write me and say, oh, the daphnia culture I got you was doing great, and then I changed it with water from my aquarium, and boom, 3 weeks later it was wall-to-wall hydra and all my daphnia were dead because they had been eaten. And what should I do? And I say, well, you're going to have to completely start over from scratch, everything in that tank. You cannot have, you're going to have to empty that water out, dry it out, and start over again. And that's what they have to do, because sometimes you can treat the hydra with certain medicines. There are basically the Panicure will kill them off and stuff, but you're not sure what else that is going to kill. And
I feel like in a vernal pool, a lot of the medications you would use would kill off part of the population at least.
Right. And so my advice is typically you got to start over. You got to dry that tank out entirely and start out. There are some things you can put in there. 503 is asking about that. There are some things that'll eat hydra. Limnea pond snails will eat hydra. The only thing is they will eat hydra, but only one has to survive. They reproduce asexually. So you could put Limnea snails, for weeks and say, oh, I don't see any hydra. I think we're good, and start over again. And 3 weeks later, boom, wall-to-wall hydra again. So that's the issue.
I think I would have seen them by now if I had hydra, because I don't.
That is likely. I think you're probably okay, because if you haven't seen them yet, you probably won't.
It's been almost a month. Honest to God, I've kept fish for 30 years. Or more than 30 years. I've never seen a hydra in any of my tanks. I've never seen one live in person.
Right.
So never seen them at a store, never seen them. Granted, I haven't been just looking for hydra in planted tanks, but I've never seen one in person. I've only seen them in videos, or really I've never seen a video with them. I've only like on YouTube, I've only seen them on TV, like Discovery Channel or something.
One funny thing about hydra is as soon as you start putting things in that hydra will eat, like daphnia, like brine shrimp nauplii, like microworms, even you put something like that in a tank for long enough, and you've never seen hydra in it for the past 8 years that you've had that tank or whatever, and suddenly you see them, because they've been there in extremely low density, surviving on whatever microorganisms they can catch. And as soon as they have a ready food source, they
multiply.
Yep. So that, I'm not going to say that always happens. It definitely doesn't, because not always all tanks have hydra in them, but that can happen.
I was always fascinated to try to see the budding that they do, because I've never seen an organism do that or start to do that. So like we talked about it in bio class in high school, I remember, but we never, we had a really low budget high school, so we never got to do any of those cool experiments.
It's cool to see. If you want to keep hydra, you can keep them pretty easily in just like a jar, and then just use an eyedropper and toss some daphnia or copepods in there and watch them eat it, and it's awesome. But you definitely want to make sure you keep the connection just one way, go from one thing to the other, not the other directions.
Sterilize afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm
going to burn this eyedropper afterwards every time. Just light it on fire.
Yeah.
I do think they're super fascinating. And I think it's not hard to get into the vernal pool organisms. I found a lab grown situation where they have them, Wardley Science, I believe, .com. Rick showed me that from Wolfie Spider-Verse, and now I'm like, my shopping cart there is totally full, and I have no money. So I'm like, yes, we're just going to get all these great little science experiments and bring them home. which my daughter doesn't care about this at all. I don't know what that was that just juked across the screen, but
Oh, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. There's a seed shrimp down at the bottom of the screen right now.
oh yeah, yeah. If you guys can
Definitely
see
seed
this
shrimp.
little, I'm going to point at the screen again. If you see the little balloon-looking thing down at the bottom, that's a seed shrimp. And there's literally hundreds of those in this tank right now, and I've only had it up a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So it may be a month now. I don't remember when you sent the first little set of organisms, but like I said, I had the copepods originally.
Yeah.
And then like right away, I noticed those and I was kind of blown away by that. And then these guys obviously have exploded in the last couple of weeks as well. There was another one.
You know, there's a giant seed shrimp. Where there's more than one species of giant seed shrimp, but I had some of those in one of my vernal pool experiments, which was really cool because imagine something like this, but a little more elongate and about the size of a Rice Krispie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
I saw them in a
big.
video. Somebody did a vernal pool video that was just like a time lapse almost. They were just taking shots throughout the life of the vernal pool.
Yeah.
And then they came back to it and it was done. You know, it was all dried up.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see. They were running around. There's hundreds of the seed shrimp. There were triops bumping everybody out of the way. Tadpoles, the tadpoles from the spade toads.
Yeah. And they're go ahead.
I want to say it was in Arizona. I don't remember.
Arizona is like the place for the best diversity of vernal pools in the whole country. They've got the coolest thing going on down there. And they have the clam shrimp too, which is super awesome. I looked for a video. I'm sure I have a video with clam shrimp in it somewhere. I could not find it when I was looking to show you, but they're awesome because they just look like little clams with the shells with the concentric rings and everything, but they swim around. It's really cool. And when I was down in Arizona with Sky Island Adventures, you know, Peter from Bugs in Cyberspace and Jesse from Shapes of Nature have their Sky Island Adventures business where you do the ecotourism with the bugs and whatnot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was down there last summer and I made some videos of it, but we saw some vernal pools and I was super excited to see what we saw. And I saw investigating, we spent maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes investigating vernal pools. I saw one Triops. One. And I was hoping to net it and, you know, get a video of it or whatnot, but I just caught a fleeting glimpse of it in this vernal pool that was probably, you know, 40 feet long and 10 feet wide or whatever. Yeah. There was no way I was going to find it again. It wasn't at the point, it was a little too early in the season for there to be large numbers of them. But a cool thing about vernal pool organisms in general that relates to this point is that, and there's so much more I could talk about, but
I know
they're adapted so that their eggs, and this is true of most vernal pool organisms that leave resting eggs in a diapause state, is that when they lay their eggs, they're laying eggs that are pre-programmed to do different things, hatch at slightly different temperatures, slightly different maybe water parameters, and definitely drying periods. So when a Triops lays eggs, say it releases X number of eggs, 100 eggs or whatever, some of those are going to be pre-programmed to hatch the first time they get hydrated with the proper type of water. Some are going to be pre-programmed to do it the second time, and some the third time, which is a great adaptation for, say, it rains one day, but it only rains enough for the vernal pool to stay full for 3 days, and then it dries up and it's dead. So any Triops that hatched, you know, in those first 8 hours or whatever, are going to die at 3 days old. But their siblings that had the eggs that are only going to hatch the second time they were hydrated are going to be fine. And the ones that are the third time, they're going to be fine too. So it's a fail-safe system. It's to their evolutionary advantage to have eggs with those various parameters built into them, pre-programmed to handle that sort of situation. Pretty fascinating. That's true of killifish as well and other vernal pool organisms. They have that sort of pre-programmed fail-safe.
I did not know killifish had their eggs that dried out like that. I didn't know that. The whole time I've been in the aquarium hobby, I had no idea. Now, they don't need that though, right? But they can do that.
It depends on the species of killifish. Some of them, some killifish do not do that at all. And other killifish can do it, and other killifish seem to need it. So,
wow,
and some of them always do it in the wild and don't necessarily need to do it in captivity, but it always happens in the wild. So
nature adapts. Green jet emoji. Yes, there are, as far as I know, there are Triops throughout the Southwest.
Oh yeah, and even in other weird places. I mean, they've shown up in Hawaii, for example. Triops longicaudatus, the species I get here in my state, and they've shown up in places like Kansas and whatnot. I mean, they're in various parts of the U.S.
That's crazy. I heard rumors that they can travel. The eggs can travel through a digestive system of like a bird.
Yeah.
And so they get through to other systems that way, like they get propagated.
And they can also travel on the mud that gets lodged on the feathers or the feet of a bird.
Okay.
It dabbles around in a vernal pool and is catching triops and whatever, and then it leaves and in the mud attached to its feet, and it flies 500 miles and lands in another pool, and there you go. You got daphnia, copepods, triops in that pool.
That makes super sense, because that's how else would they get there? They can't.
They also travel by wind, because when they're dry, they're dust.
Oh, that's
and
true.
So they will travel by wind as well. So it's pretty fascinating adaptations that they have.
That's true. And then they would just take over the next area that has. Some would make it to an area that's a depression, and propagate the next time.
Right, eventually. And sometimes, I mean, there are brine shrimp we know can hatch after the resting eggs can hatch after 10,000 years.
What?
So triops, I don't know what the limits are, but it's years. And most other vernal pool organisms, the resting stage, as long as their eggs are in conditions that are conducive to their survival, which are pretty incredibly crazy, they can get very, very hot. They can get very, very cold and extraordinarily dry. They can do their thing.
Victor's worried he's going to be inhaling them. So, yeah, they would probably hatch in you too. Like, you're pretty solid, dude.
As long as you drink some distilled water.
Yeah, don't have too many solids, minerals.
Just a little bit of compost with some distilled water.
Just unreal. Now I have other things to worry about. That's perfect. That's perfect. I'm inhaling microorganisms from a vernal pool. Like I don't worry about ants raining down on me in the middle of the show. Who else has to worry about that? Oh, Miles is here. Triops eggs can be spread basically any kind of way. Yes.
They can be spread by wind, by birds with mud on their feet. Yeah, lots of
Russ's sneakers as he's traipsing around the desert looking for vernal pools.
That could happen too. Totally.
That's like roaches. That's how roaches get there. If you ever see a roach, guys, don't step on it. If you're worried about roaches in your house, because it could be a pregnant female and you could be leaving with eggs on your shoe.
Ugh.
So heads up. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
I know there's so much more we could talk about. I could go on again 3 hours for this conversation.
Yeah.
But I also know you have family members to tend to.
I got to go make sure my wife is okay because she's not feeling well.
We appreciate that. Ms. Wilson, we appreciate you.
She does say hi, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
She said hi, so she wanted to greet everybody. So yeah, I appreciate coming on. It's been fun, and like we were saying, I could totally talk about vernal pool organisms forever, and we just scratched the surface. But I hope everybody is excited about it, and let's get into it.
Yeah, and I expect to do more videos about vernal pool organisms as I get them. So we might try to cover this again. And you seem to be a leading pseudo expert, so and have a ton of information.
Cool.
I'm always hesitant to call someone an expert because sometimes people get like, "No, I'm not."
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself an expert in vernal pools, but I have a little experience.
I wish you could see my mouse. You can't see my mouse on your screen, right?
No.
Okay, because I'm trying to point out there's a guy right in the middle that doesn't quite look like a. I guess it is a copepod. Never mind.
Oh, I see the one you're talking about. Yeah, I think that is copepod. But...
Yeah, I see more of them zipping around now. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Russ. I always appreciate having you on. I always appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule
to come visit. It's always fun.
So, good. I love hearing that. So, have a good day. Tell Mrs. Wilson that we're hoping for her recovery.
Will do.
And we'll talk to you next time.
All right.
Thanks,
Catch you
Russ.
later. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Always good to have Russ on. So this was a shorter one. I know, having Russ on for a short episode, kind of a ripoff, but health being an issue, we got to take care of that. So they do look like little Starship Enterprises. They are so dope. I'm so excited to have these guys in my life. I'll tell you. They're super easy. Start the tank with the distilled water and let it go. Keep a light on it so you get your algae. And that's all I did. And then, obviously, I got a little bit of a boost from Russ. So just do that. But you can get all of these eggs online and follow the instructions. So hatch them in pure distilled water in something small, keep them fed for a couple days, pour them into your main tank. So that's it. Super easy. So guys, thanks for coming. Next week we have, oh my God, I don't remember who we have. It's not Wally. I'll get to it. We'll get to it. So it's not Wally next week. It's Wally the week after. We're going to talk about something. Keepers versus collectors. And then next week is, my phone's over there. I don't have my calendar on me. So we'll see you guys. Thanks for coming. As always, love you. Thanks for coming. Honestly, love my audience. So see you next week, guys. Same bad time, same bad channel.